Well, welcome everyone. Good evening, and welcome to the Sausalito Public Library. I'm City Librarian Abbott Chambers, and this is our fourth installment of the Sausalito People program series, highlighting interesting people here in Sausalito, and I think tonight's guest more than qualifies. Gordie Nash was born in the East Bay to sailing parents. In an old photo album, Gordie has a picture of himself at 6 months, strapped to the mast of the Sausalito Nunes Brothers Mercury kit his father built. In 1964, at age 14, his parents gave him $5 to explore Sausalito while they raced their 110 class sailboat on Richardson's Bay. Gordie walked from one end of Sausalito to the other, stopping for lunch at Guernica's on Broadway. When the day was over, he made a decision. Someday he would come to live in Sausalito. That vision came true in 1970, the year Gordie built the Sausalito houseboat that he still calls home today. 1970 was also the year that Gordie inadvertently founded the Funky Boat Race on the Sausalito waterfront, in somewhat dodgy circumstances, involving local characters Pete Sutter, Spike Africa, Water Street Pete, and Tony Williams. In the mid-1970s, Gordie became a pioneer in the rapidly expanding world of long-distance open water rowing. In addition to competing up and down the coast of California, Gordie founded and managed one of the first companies to build and market open water rowing boats. In 1977, Gordie launched the Open Water Rowing Regatta. Still going strong, 36 years later, this year's event takes place on Sunday. Heart troubles in recent years have brought Gordie back to sailing. In 2002, he began the multi-year project of rebuilding a fiberglass Santana 27, which he dubbed Arcadia. Today, he and his wife, Ruth Suzuki, compete regularly in Arcadia. In March of 2013, their 5-person crew won the overall trophy at the Golden Gate Yacht Club Midwinters for the second time. These days, Gordie builds sailboats at a shop in Richmond, California. He's currently working on 40 and 46-foot boats. He is also developing a carbon fiber version of the El Toro racing dinghy like the one you see here tonight. Please join me in welcoming Sausalito's own Gordie Nash.
Well, I don't have much more to say about, but it really is true that there is a picture of me strapped to the mast in this Mercury. So I started in Sausalito before I was a year old. When I got into the houseboat, to get out to the houseboat, I was one of these anchor outs. To get out, I had to row. But I decided rowing out in the bay would be a whole lot more fun. And I inadvertently acquired an Alden Ocean shell. And Arthur Martin had designed the Alden as a kayak. And he realized there was this market out there for rowing boats, and maybe he should put a rowing master in it. And started building open water boats. But back to 1969, Pete Sutter, Kid Africa had built a dory, number 5, and there was a big picture in the scope about taking it down the hill and launching it at what at the time was Sam's. Pete Sutter wanted to race Kit, so he got me and my dory and made a challenge, and Tony Williams heard about this and decided to put a Funky Boat Race poster out there, and I got a dock, just a little end dock, and I tied it up in the markers right at the Sausalito Yacht Club downtown, and Water Street Pete showed up with a keg of beer, and Pete Sutter didn't show up, and Kid Africa didn't show up. But there were about 30 rowing boats. So we went to Cone Rock and up to the old dry docks and then back. And the next year, we showed all kinds of boats showed up. And the Funky Boat Race was started, and every July 4th, then on into the late 90s, I ran this funny little boat race. There was one time that Channel 5 came down to the waterfront to photograph this strange thing. And I got a note saying, "Gordie, they want to interview you." And I said, "I'm busy." And I had this long list of, okay, how about kayaks? And then boats without oars, and then paddle boards and all this sort of stuff. And it ended up being one of the days somebody had taken garbage cans, cut a bunch of circles in a great amount of plywood. So the person would stand in the garbage can. There would be a little bit of foam around, some mattresses, a funny little sail, a big hunk of ice with beer in it. And women dressed in lingerie, men not dressed, and it was called the Wet Dream. And, and after that, eventually the waterfront became fractionalized because Waldo Point Harbor and all the houseboats were a problem for the city fathers and the people on the hill. So there started to be a animosity between the two groups. So that was the perfect time to start a rowing race. And in 1977, I ran the Open Ocean Rowing Regatta. And Carrie, in the yellow shirt, brought quite a few memorabilia from that time. The first race was run with an Islander 36 and Jimmy Leach and me, and we went out to Horseshoe Bay and sent them all out under the Golden Gate Bridge, hightailed it back to Sausalito to make a finish line. 22 boats showed up, and the boat that won was a boat called the Viking from the Dolphin Club. It had a sliding seat. All the other boats were fixed seat boats. And that kind of started this whole thing where you would take a traditional boat, a seaworthy boat, put all of the fancy racing shell stuff in it, and you could row around San Francisco Bay. What a great idea. And in 78, I thought, maybe there's a business in this. In 79, I started Rowing Crafters, and the first boat we built was the Viking. And we actually took the original boat, turned it upside down, waxed it, took a mold off of it, and built a dozen of these things. And in 79, I raced it in the Catalina race. And that's a whole nother story. After 77, I got a little note in the mail saying, would you like to row from the Isthmus of Catalina to Marina del Rey? It's only 32-point-something nautical miles. How fast can you get this in a round file? I got another letter that started with, this is what we expect. This is what we're going to do. Written by a lawyer. And when you started reading about the race, the Catalina race, by the time at the bottom, it said entry. I filled in my name. Put it back in the envelope, sent it, and then I realized I needed to build a boat for this race. That was 78, and 79 was the Viking. And in 1980, I was trying to put together a bunch of people to go, and I was going to crew for somebody, and everything fell apart. So I took one of these boats that's not supposed to be rowed in the ocean. Arthur Martin said, this is not an ocean boat. And I put it on somebody's car and said, if you tie it down, and I'll see you in L.A. Got on an airplane, and the boat showed up, went out, and that was the first race I won. And I called up Arthur Martin and said, your boat won the race. He said, that boat's not supposed to be rowed in the ocean. From then on, Rowing Crafters really did try to make the Catalina race the premier event. We had many races around the bay. Open Ocean, South End, the Dolphin Club. There was, at the time, a race in the estuary called the Head of the Estuary that really showed up with a lot of racing shells and a lot of open water boats. There was open water doubles and singles, and we were getting 30 and 40 boats out for that. There was a little, again, animosity. There's always some around, between the flat water people who thought they were really rowing and the open water people who were going out there in the ocean. So I said, well, this is crazy. Let's take a Viking and row around the Farallon Islands. And there's a poster around here somewhere about the story about rowing around the Farallones. Carrie's got it. And it was a 13-hour trip out and back, and it's crazy. It really is crazy because nobody else has tried it. It's one group. Everybody in the world is crazy, or I'm crazy. I've got a list of other things. We're very, very fortunate in Sausalito, and me especially, to have been in a position to see a sport grow. And every year, on Sunday after Catalina, you'd say, I'm never doing that again. Monday morning, it's okay. I know how to do this better. I can train a little bit differently. I can get a little bit better water system, better boat, a little longer, a little leaner. And every year we progressed. The first year I did it in my little plywood boat that I built in '78, I measured from the bathroom door to the front door. It was 20 feet, so the boat was 20 feet long. It was 8 hours and 20 minutes. In 1986, I set the course record. 4 hours, 27. The people who row have heard the story that every boat has an escort. We had a Grand Banks 41, monster powerboat, big, huge engines. We're sitting at the island, and he says, so how fast are you going to row? How many RPMs do I need on the engines? I said, we're planning to do this in 4.5 hours. He says, I don't go that fast. I had a piece of paper. The first mark after you leave the island is 19 miles. And I wanted to know how fast we were going. So I did all of the math, except he just had to fill in the time we got to that mark. And then we would know how fast we were going. At 19, we were miles out, which is less than 2 hours, or an hour, I forget. He did all the math and realized that we were not joking. There's a picture that hung in Sherwin's office for a long time where it had beautiful Santa Monica Bay, absolutely flat calm, except this one hunk of air, this a little offshore. And we're right in the middle of it. It's like the guy with the cloud over his head. And it slowed us down that 7 minutes. Other than that, we were real close. It took almost 10 years for Craig Leeds and Steve Hathaway to break that record. In the early part of the sport, the idea was that you would have a boat that would go over the waves and work around the waves, and we put water wings on, and somebody said, well, why don't we just, the heck with the waves, let's just go through them. So we started stretching these things, and in 1983, a customer had inadvertently dropped his Alden double off on the freeway, and he brought it back in 2 pieces. So it's supposed to be 18 feet. Well, if you put one end over there and you pull it out to about here and you fill in the section, it ends up being 26 feet. It took almost an hour off the course record. And then the other remarkable thing about Catalina was in 1986, so much had been developed that there was not a boat in that race in 86 that was not designed or built in 1985. It was going so quickly and so fast. And the single course record started at 6 hours and it went down to 5.5, 5.25, now it's at 4:57. And we're very pleased also to have, I did 12 of them. And the last one was in a propeller boat. And there's a picture of it under the Golden Gate Bridge right there. This thing is 11 inches wide, 28 feet long, 2 little pontoons so it doesn't tip over. And you sit in a seat and leg drive. Because in the end of the 80s, I'd blown out my elbows and had 4 elbow operations. It's all congenital and a lot of that stuff. But we really shouldn't be learning about our bodies in that way. But of course, the number of times for Catalina is owned by Kerry Chenoweth. He's here. He's done 60. He's lost count at 16. So he really is the leader. There's one other thing that happened in the world of rowing, which usually they name trophies after you after you're dead. Sherwin and I were blessed in '95 to have a trophy made with our names on it. This is the Gordie Nash and Sherwin Smith Perpetual Trophy. And what we've done, instead of giving it to somebody who pulls an oar real fast and wins the race, we give it to somebody who kind of symbolizes what the sport's all about, or helps or does work or something, and Kerry Chenoweth is on it. Jim Flack, Stan Mullen, Steve Hathaway, all the people who really helped. But once the elbows gave out, I sat on the beach for a little while and realized that's no fun. So I took another one of these 22-footers, it was fairly wide, and put a leg drive to a propeller, which worked reasonably well. And that boat ended up giving it to Kerry. He made it back into a rowing boat. But I eventually got to a point where I could build on one of these 28-footers and sit in it and go pretty quickly. And that kept me going for another 10 years. And it was a lot of fun. Kenny Robinson and I would go out in the morning at 5:30 or 4. Some ungodly something. I think I was up at 5 and on the water at 5:15. And row for an hour and a half, and go out and try to kill each other. You get around a mark, and you look at each other, okay? And you'd go as hard as you could for a half an hour. And we eventually did around Angel Island in the morning, in the dark. We tried to make sure we fit in between the ferry boats. So as one was leaving, the other was coming in, we were going in between. It was absolutely crazy. But it was a lot of fun. And I played pedal boats for a while, and then the heart gave out. But when you get to the pearly gates, you don't get extra points for turning your body back in good shape. So I eventually but continued with the sport of sailing, where does so many people start sailing? And that's in a little El Toro. Oh. So there we are. Somebody said, isn't an El Toro unsafe in the middle of San Francisco Bay? Yeah. The Golden Gate Bridge. But this is 8 feet long, and I raced across a bay that's 4 miles wide. But I've also raced to Hawaii in boats that are 30 feet long. So proportionally, a 30-footer is really unsafe. So back to toros, and in the early 90s, I built one out of carbon, which was reasonably successful. Had a hole in the back and all this other stuff. And it never really got out of its own way. But then I built this one in 2002, and I've won 2 national championships. This one is unidirectional carbon, but it's vinyl ester resin. It hasn't been cooked. The ones we're starting to build now are going to be a Crowfoot 3K carbon epoxy with Kevlar cloth, all fancy stuff, and it's also going to be autoclaved. The sails have already developed to Kevlar. And the boom is hollow carbon. All this stuff just costs a lot of money. But it does make the boat go faster. The class rules are 80 pounds, so they all have to weigh 80. But there's lead in this one instead of other stuff. A lot of people, including Paul Kayard and John Kostecki, if you've followed America's Cup, they started sailing El Toros. Jim DeWitt started sailing El Toros. And one of these old guys that decided he had to see what this new stuff was about. He got in this boat, and he pulled in the main. And usually on a wood boat, you pull in the main, and you kind of settle yourself in, and the boat twists, and the mast bends, and you start getting it going. Pull it in here, and the thing jumps out of the water comparatively. It's the same boat, but it's a different boat. The development. There's class rules. You can't change the hull. You can't change the sail area. But the rest of it, we've been kind of looking sideways at. There's a story of Hank Jotz, who won 7 bullships. There was a time when the class was, you have to build it like the plans. But there was a place where it was a lot smarter to put the stick of wood underneath holding the top of whatever this was, instead of the other way. So they told Hank Jotz that he didn't have an El Toro. So he went and built another one, kind of grumbling. But today, the class has been opened up that you can do whatever you want. The class also has, you can make the boat out of any material, which I don't think the guys in 1938 were thinking about. Yeah, 1938. We're thinking that any material meant, I think they thought mahogany, ash, fir, oak, plywood. So somebody said there was a new boat on the market called the J105, and it had an asymmetrical spinnaker. And the idea was, what if we took an existing boat that had a symmetrical spinnaker, the original style, and made an asymmetrical out of the boat, took the credit, because they're supposed to be slower, from the PHRF committee, went out and see if we could race and see what we could do with the boat. So I talked to a couple of my customers, and they all said, no, not to my boat. So there we had the dilemma. I had to do it myself. So I had lunch with Gary Mull, a naval architect, actually designed the original Santana 27 in 1968. And I said, well, we learned this in rowing. You take a boat and make it longer, make it lighter, you make it leaner, it's going to go faster. And his eyes lit up. And he said, well, what do you have in mind? I said, that's what I want. He drew on a placemat. That boat in 1997. And his idea was, if he had the knowledge in 1968 to do that, that's what he would have done. And by the time I had found one of these Santana 27s to modify, he died. So I had to do all of the naval architecture myself. And there's a lot to naval architecture. There's balance, and there's displacement, and there's sail area, and all these formulas. And I asked Gary Mull once, well, you must have slide rules, and long before calculators, and formulas. And he said, nope. You design a boat by the seat of your pants. You just kind of draw what you want, and then you see if it'll work. So there's also a story about Carl Shoemaker, who's also has ended up being a very good independent naval architect. Gary walked by his desk and said, that won't work. Keel's in the wrong place. And Carl went through no, Gary, the math is right. So Gary took the drawing, went into his office, and you could hear the copier going. And then Carl walked in, and Gary Mull had cut out the hull, underwater profile, and balanced it on a ruler. And that's the center of lateral resistance. So when I heard that, of course, what am I going to do? I take the original, I cut it out, I balance it, I said, that's Gary's spot. I go down to the original boat, and I take a pencil, and I push the boat sideways. And by golly, the spot's the same. So that started the process of redesigning the boat. That's what a Santana 27 looks like. And that's the boat I found. That was in latitude 38 under Santana 27 needs paint. I didn't care if it needed paint, because when I got done with it, it wasn't going to look like that. I called up the guy. I said, I'm going to write you a check. I'm going to send you it in the mail. And if you cash the check, the boat's mine. He said, do you want to see it? I said, no. Don't want to see it. Does it float? Yeah, fine. That's all I needed, because all I want is the hull. The boat it had a couple of offers that were reasonably decent offers, and had gone to survey, and the surveyor said the boat's worthless because the main bulkhead was gone, all the woodwork inside was rotten. This is an old boat that had been sitting in the delta all winter and half the summer with water in it. And of course that doesn't do much for a boat, especially a fiberglass boat that has wood bulkheads. And Ruth and I walk up to the boat, and we thought, oh, there's nothing wrong with this boat, because the guys cashed the check. It wasn't for a lot of money. I told him what my budget was, and he said, oh, they'll never fly. So, right. So I bought a boat. There it is. You've heard the story about somebody buying a boat hadn't been used long enough that little birds made a nest inside the mainsail. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. And you look at it and go, this is exactly the boat I was on in 1968. I was working for John Beery, and I got on a Santana 27, the first one that showed up in Northern California. I stood in the cockpit and said, there's a lot wrong with this boat. Why would you want to change a good boat? An Express 27 or a Cal 40. You want to change something that's got some problems with it. You could stand in the cockpit and the boom wouldn't hit you in the head. Ruth couldn't sit on the side of the boat and steer the boat because there's no place for her feet, no place to sit. It was the old style traditional cockpit. It's terrible. The cabin top was too high. Back in the 60s, if you were involved with a boat that was lived in the water, this was the time when you took the family down to the harbor with a pot of food. You put the kids in the front. You sat in the back. You had dinner. You all put the kids to sleep. And in the morning, you got up and you sailed someplace, stayed on the boat Saturday night. Sunday afternoon, you'd sail back to the marina. Today, we use our boats. We go down to the boat on Saturday morning and sail it a little bit and go home and have a shower and go to sleep in our own beds. So this interior isn't the kind of thing that boats are being, there's just not the kind of boat they're building these days. Unless you buy a Beneteau or a Jeanneau, something like that. And they're really Catalinas. They have big interiors, but that's what they sell. We actually sailed the boat. We went to a race. We went to the George and Gracie race at Encinal Yacht Club. Got off the starting line in real good shape. Boat went upwind like a freight train. Gary Mull's boats do that. Turned the weather mark. Put out all our sails. And everybody marched by. And we were, as they say, DFL. And, okay, we're going to change this thing, and we got to make it go downwind. Got to the dock, tied it up. This is my brand new child. Tammy Richards steps aboard, and he says, "Did you buy this boat?" And I was, "Oh, this is my new toy. I'm gonna change this." And then he says, "You got a lot to do because you ain't starting with much." Well, it arrived at Schoonmaker Marina, and there's two harbor masters, one for the marina and one for Richardson Bay. Well, and the guy at Richardson Bay, his job is to take the anchor outs that drift away and put them in a dumpster. Well, the harbor master at Schoonmaker asked Bill, the guy who puts boats in the dumpsters, "Can you take care of this after Gordie's kind of lost interest?" Well, when it started with the deck over there and the cockpit over there and all these parts, their comment was, "He's making it easier for us." This is the forepeak. There actually was a water tank that wouldn't hold water. You can see hull deck joint coming apart. That's what the surveyor looks at that and goes, "This is crazy. This is just not going to work." The ring frame over the cabin top was falling apart. All of the seat work was rotten underneath the floors. You could put your finger through that hole. To me, what was good about it was I didn't have to work very hard to take it apart. It's all just, the bulkhead's completely just falling apart. This was great. What a great toy. You can see where the fiberglass is coming off the bulkheads. Well, there's the new bulkhead. There's the new cabin top. We have pictures of the cabin top over there. And one of the problems with a boat was to get a big interior. The side decks were put at a very steep angle. So this is 1.5 inches taken down to nothing. And this represents the carbon that I used to make the whole cabin side come in 4 inches. And how do you rename a boat? Right? Just take the transom off. If you look in the nautical books, you pour champagne in certain places and you say certain words. Well, no, that's the entire cockpit. There's 400 pounds worth of fiberglass there. So this is like having a blank piece of paper. I can do anything I want. Well, I did. That's the traveler bulkhead. If you remember, Dennis Connors was sailing his America's Cup boat off of Long Beach. And sure enough, they pulled the traveler bulkhead out. The rudder is attached to that bulkhead. All the runners, the main traveler, the cockpit, everything is attached to that bulkhead. And the boat sunk. That's because they forgot to take the wax off of the interior of the hull when the boat was built. And once they got the boat back to the dock, after pulling it out of the water, you could feel the wax. It's still there. So I made sure it was taped in with carbon. These are the side seats, and the curves ended up being real simple to figure out because fiberglass by itself is relatively flexible until you put a core and then another layer of fiberglass. So you're building, in effect, an I-beam. So to make the curve, just don't put any core there, curve it around and put the core in second. And it ended up being just too simple. One on both sides. I put a winch right up here and a box before the cockpit went in. And I had Ruth stand there with a handle. And so she's a tall woman. So okay. I wanted to make sure that she could easily winch. Use the winch, and then the cockpit sole was put in place. So it was a lot more comfortable for her. I went one day, I had to build the scoop in the back. So I just went there one day saying, okay, today's the day to build the scoop. I have no clue how to do it. So I had some plastic, and I went, well, I wonder if this works. Oh, okay. Glassed it up, did it the other side. Oh, it seemed to be just fine. Glassed the outside, and that's what it looks like. I thought that was, well, it's as good as any. Then I started on the bow. And so I just kind of took out the Sawzall and whacked away at it, and and a very famous Sausalito boat builder came by and looked at this thing and started howling with laughter. It ain't ever going to get in the water. In effect, what I've done is simply spread the bow. And if you've done any dressmaking or sail making, it's all putting together strips of material, sewing it together. Well, you could do that with a boat. So I just cut darts with the Sawzall and thought, well, this might work. And yeah, there's some dimensions there. This is the original bow. I say that much. So the boat's the same length. Well, it kind of got lots of sticks and screwed from the inside into the sticks, 2x4s, a bunch of other stuff, and developed some foam core. And see, a little bit in the front, and that's a picture of the inside. And this was the most important machine. A hot glue gun. The whole thing was put together with hot glue. Just fill in the foam core. There's the Kielson piece, and this seems to be pretty simple. There's the main bulkhead and the cockpit and all that other stuff in the background, and the mast step. It looks pretty dangerous. You just never know what a boat looks like until you get it all the same color. Oh, that's the dead sander. The sander works for a while, and then you rebuild it, and then it dies. So, oh well. And that's what it looked like, and quite different. More fairing, lots of putty. This was taken just before we went on auspice to Hawaii with Brian. And we put it in the water. And on the foredeck there is a level, because before I took it out of the water, put the level up there and made sure that it was correct. And to get the level right, we put lead inside. That's Doug Froelich, the naval architect, who helped me quite a bit. And how do you know where the outside of the water is? Well, taped up in blue is a little tube. I just simply did a through hull in a piece of plastic and marked on the bulkhead how much water was, where the ocean was. Filled it with a whole bunch of lead and talked about it, this and that, and then decided to build a keel. This is something that I would not recommend anybody to do. Having 1,000 pounds of lead in a big, hot crucible made out of stainless steel, sitting on top of wood pallets with a big fire underneath it. It started smoking. That's the wood pallets burning. But we got it done. I got it faired, and I did all these calculations of where the keel should be and how much buoyancy in the front and the back. And why don't I just put the bulb in where I think it should go, and we'll see if the boat floats there. And I was off a lot. I was off 7 inches, and I could have gone another inch. But that's at Spalding's when we were putting the keel in the hole. And Spalding's had a crane that it could put the hull way up in the sky and then drop the keel from the inside out, attach the bulb, and that's what it looks like on the inside. Actually, Commodore Tompkins, the one that came by and looked at this whole thing. And he said, "Oh, well, just put the keel on." I said, "Well, I've got to line up this and get the scopes out and put the sticks on both sides and measure and get the boat level and all that sort of stuff." And he said, "No, go like this." Took the jack, bolted it on, tightened it up, said, "There, it's done." So I fiberglassed the inside, and so Commodore did it. There's the side seats, real simple construction. Back on a trailer, and then actually bought a mast. Built a crane to put it up, and then Jocelyn came to measure for the sails. And we went sailing in 2006. It's basically 5 years worth of work. Would I recommend it to anybody? No. The project could be done on other boats much more simply. But the idea started with, let's take a boat with a symmetrical spinnaker and put an asymmetrical on it. And then it ends up being this incredibly long process. But, okay, that's what we got. I have a small list of races we've been in for 6 years. I don't think anybody else does this. Average in the sailboats, in class. This is the particular class that I've sailed in. My average is 1.6. So for the number of firsts during the year, of averaging 1.6, 1.8. In the entire fleet, I was averaging about 15th. It's very tough beating a Cal 40. Very tough. But this is every race the boat's ever been in. We're very lucky to basically, as you get, the first year you go sailing a boat like this, you break stuff. And that's what we did. The traveler line would get all twisted up, so I had to rebuild all the travelers. The main sheet got all twisted up, so all that had to be redone. It took a long time, but by the end of September, the first win was Jazz Cup. For San Francisco to Benicia. We knew we could do it. Went out and did it. Oh yeah, that's, I devised this fancy rudder system. Everybody was going to, on the rudders, going to this fancy new rope. These Kevlar Spectra ropes that don't stretch. Right. A spinnaker halyard on this boat will stretch 1 inch per 10 feet. And that's very little. But when you're talking 80 feet of spinnaker halyard, that's intolerable. But the old style ropes would go twice that. So we're sailing, Ruth's driving. I'm trimming the spinnaker, it's blowing 20, 22. Off the face of Angel Island, big waves, and the boat takes off, surfs down a wave, keeps on going, and Ruth says, I can't steer. So, what do you mean you can't steer? The tiller's wiggling. Okay, I'll drive. Yeah, no question, we're going to crash. There was enough time to say, which way? I have no idea. The spinnaker, we get spinnaker down, the halyard went out, and the sheets went out, and the tack line went out, and there's the sail out there. The main's luffing, and we're heading for Angel Island. So I go back to the little bit of rudder that's left, and I turn it real hard, and the boat jibes, and we're now leaving Angel Island thinking, well, okay, we're going to live. We finally get the sail down, tie up the little bit of rudder, take some strings to the winches, and sail back to the dock and pull it out of the water and put it on his trailer and say, let's have dinner. And redesign the system. And that's when Jim Antrim got involved with the steering system. And so in that boat is Gary Mull, Carl Shoemaker, he designed and built the bulb, Doug Froelich, who did the strut and specified the mast, and Jim Antrim for the steering. And so it takes a village. And you might be wondering why everything's yellow. Well, when I was building boats and I had to put a boat into the Cow Palace for the boat show, I had acquired every color of the rainbow. And when somebody would buy a boat, we'd say, well, what color do you want? And nobody picked yellow. So I had all this yellow. So, well, what color is going in the boat show but a yellow boat? So people would come by and go, oh, I love that boat. I gotta have one. And they'd order a boat. And I'd say, well, what color would you like? anything but that. So it ended up being my boat. It's not my choice because we're in Hawaii at the Aloha Flea Market, and we're buying seat covers. The guy has seat covers behind him, a whole big mishmash, just in boxes, and he's looking at me, and he reaches, oh, you need, he doesn't look, and he pulls out a yellow one. I go and buy a heart rate monitor. It comes in 3 colors: red, black, and yellow. He says, I'll go get one each, and you can decide what color you want. He comes back and says, we only have yellow. What was that? Clothing choices? Yeah. If you look in all of the magazines for rowing shorts, bicycle shorts, running shorts, they're all black. And they all cost $30, $40. If you want yellow, they're $189. That's where my money goes. So everything's yellow. For the last time I won the bullship race was 2002, which was the 50th year. What color was the sweatshirt? It was yellow. And I don't know why the 60th is red, but it's okay. It's okay. So now we're going back to sailing. And the other thing that has happened is in 2008, after my 4th heart ablation, which still didn't work, they started doing what's called a mini maze surgery. And a year and 4 months ago, I surrendered my body to the doctor, knowing that this was not going to be fun. I didn't know that it was going to be as bad as it was. But they went in with lots of holes, 10 major holes and 5 other ones, and they went in there and rebuilt the left atria. And today I'm drug-free. No stents. No, they rebuilt them. It's all been rebuilt with all this stuff. But we live in a time when if your car breaks, you take it down to the mechanic. If your body breaks, go get it fixed. I've only had 12 operations, 4 elbows, 5 hearts, and some other stuff. Go get fixed. This is just great. We're probably not going to live a whole lot longer than we've basically extended our lifespan over with our intelligence about 3 times. And living to 90 is 3 times what we were originally designed to live. And that's pretty good. But after 90, if we can start replacing the heart and replacing the lungs and the livers and all that stuff, maybe we could extend our lifespans a little bit more. I mean, I think we're doing pretty well as a species comparatively. Any questions?
So I'll start with a question, and that is kind of turning back the clock. Who was Spike Africa?
Oh, Spike Africa is the son of, Spike Africa. Kit Africa is Spike Africa's son.
Okay.
Spike Africa is known for a lot of antics and writing a book and sailing to the South Pacific. And he was part of, I think, the Wanderbird. Not the Wanderbird, the Wanderer. Uh-huh. One of the guys on board.
And Kit was?
Son.
Kit?
He was a local character that was young, and he built wood boats and none of this fiberglass stuff. I had built a wood boat in my life And after 2 or 3 months of working and trying to sell it, I realized I'd better learn fiberglass. So I took a mold off of that boat, and there's a picture of the 14-foot New York Harbor Whitehall that we built, over 300 of them. And they're as far away as New York. Guy walked in the shop one day, dressed to the nines, white Cadillac with red interior, convertible. Just, you'd think the guy was an actor or something. Just, he walked in and he said, "Who owns this place?" "I want one of those. I want Sausalito written on the transom, and I want you to send it to my office." "Yes, sir." "Where's that?" "Albany, New York." "The address is number 1 Computer Road." So in the back of one of these big power boats that's 14 feet wide is a Whitehall going up and down the Hudson. And a gentleman borrowed my boat to take to a lake in Idaho, Coeur d'Alene, big lake, beautiful. He gets up in the morning, he gets out into my little boat, and he rows, can't quite row all the way around the lake in a day, but he rows up and down. And after a week, he calls me and says, "I've got 17 friends who want boats." "Yes, sir." And that, of all the boats I built, I'm hoping that people will remember me for that one, especially. It was it did a lot of things well. It's reasonably seaworthy. We built them really pretty well, but we made money on them too. And a lot of them are out there. And there was one gentleman who happens to have been part of a glass company, the company started building glass that you could put in the microwave or put on top of a stove, Corning, right? I'm driving with this thing on my Volkswagen bus, and this black car following me. And he follows me all the way through Mill Valley and all the way through my errands and right to the shop. He said, "Where'd you get that?" I said, "In there." He took one of these boats, went out when the herring was running. And we know how much herring you can put in a Whitehall because he canned 600 pounds. And he just took a scoop, scooped it in the boat. And when it got to the seats, he rode home. Lee Flint did the same thing. Here's this monster powerboat, fishing boat with the lines and all this stuff out to catch a sturgeon. And here he comes in with his little rowboat. And he's rowing along and one little string out the back. And he gets a nibble and a bite. And he fights this thing in front of this monster powerboat. And this sturgeon's so big, he tilts the boat over and kind of scoops it in. And is hanging out over the side. He rows by the big boat and says, "Big doesn't really work for me." But, yeah.
Hi. I assume the El Toro has been a fixture for a long time. Do you remember how old you were when you first started sailing the El Toro?
I remember 5.5 years old getting in an El Toro and saying, "See ya." Yeah. The sail number of my father's boat reflects how he treated me, and his number was 666. My mother and I get along really well. Her number was 727. And that's my number. And my next number is going to be 12,000, which it'll be later this year. And Toros have been around a long time. What we've found is if you go back in history and time, there are a lot of boats that were made in plywood or wood that did not convert well to fiberglass. Think of the Penguin, the Blue Jay, the Sunboat, and then you think of boats like the Starboat. They converted well, and the Finn converted well. Well, the El Toro is also converted well to fiberglass. Also, the sail area of the Toro today, because it's Kevlar and it doesn't have any resistance. The wind that it gets is the power that it makes. Back in the 30s, when all these boats were, including the Finn and the Star, when they were designed around cotton sails, which had an enormous amount of give. So they had to put a whole lot of cotton up there to get the boat out of its own way. And now, these boats are powerful. There's a lot of sail area for these guys. Makes it a lot more fun. Next question.
Gordie, show them the photograph that I just gave you of the Alden being taken by the professional photographer for America's Cup. This is the Austin out of the Dolphin Club, and Marcus is rowing this boat, and the two of the America's Cups come screaming by, including the photographer for the America's Cup, and they took this picture, and it's all over the world.
This is one of the boats built. And this represents 300 years of dock design, because back in England, if you wanted to get out to a ship on Thames River, you went down to Whitehall Street and got in a rowboat, and they would take you out. And so the boat that was used was called Whitehall. And there's actually a Whitehall in New York. And if you, at the time, when New York started, you went down to Whitehall Street, got in a rowboat, and went out to the boat, a ship. And so that's the particular style of the Whitehall. And this boat is a New York harbor, which I think that if you're going to build something out of wood, you're not going, a material that you can bend, shape, improve. Every one you theoretically build, the next one you build should be better than the one you just did. So over time, a wood boats developed into really, really good boats, and then somebody comes along and takes a mold off of it, and the design never changes again. But I can make a living at it. Next question.
Hi, Gordie. Hey, neighbor.
A lot of neighbors here. I'm very pleased.
My boat's right across from where Gordie lives. Just
your mast is down.
The what? The mast is down. That's right.
Or it's not up.
It's not up. No, it's in the yard. I'm changing all the rigging. Anyway, I just a comment. I was the rowing commissioner for a number of years at the Dolphin Club, and the Viking is still doing its thing. And we have boat night on Tuesday nights if anybody wants to come down to the Dolphin Club and look at some wooden boats.
In Wooden Boat Magazine, they really do the research for Wooden Boat Magazine. It's a fabulous organization. And there's a gentleman that called me 4 or 5 years ago and wanted to talk about the Viking. And over 2.5 years, he wrote an article that's 5 pages of Wooden Boat Magazine. And the first paragraph, my name's in it.
One note about the Viking. My first row to Sacramento was in the Viking with 2 other members of the Dolphin Club. And I gave everybody, the full chart for Sacramento. And I didn't have one, so we used my AAA map, and I got lost in Honker Bay. But we did end up in Rio Vista that night anyway.
But what was really great about open water rowing is we actually did long-distance touring as well to Discovery Bay. We went up into the Delta, often in a couple of races. We did the entire American, not the entire, but most of the American River once in a regatta. And rowing was a lot of fun, really a lot of fun. It was a great career. I do want to recognize that there's a gentleman that sailed his boat in the single-handed Transpac, and he was first overall, Mr. John Quancy. And we're sitting at lunch in Hawaii, and we're talking about the race. This happens. So he said the first 3 days were really light air. We're waiting for this northerly to fill in. At day 5, we're going to see what the fleet's going to do. At the end of day 5, we add up all the numbers. How far have you gone? It was the first day of good wind. On Nancy, the Wiley Cat 30 I was on, I said to my crew, be prepared for second or third, because the Cal 40 has done almost 100 miles in one day. No, excuse me, 200 miles. You did 191 miles in one day. And we'd done 180 something. Good thing we were 100 miles ahead of you at that point. Because the same day, the same conversation he had was, be prepared for second or third, guys, because we're not going fast enough. And I think that the Delta was 45 minutes. Sailed 2,100 miles, and we beat you by 45 minutes. Corrected time. It was that close. And there was also another boat in the race that I'm surprised we didn't see him at the finish line. We were that close. It was an amazing race. Also, we have Brian here, whose father and Ruth and I sailed Auspice in 06 and 08 to Hawaii, and we finished third in class both years. So Brian and his lovely Alon, yeah, they're here tonight too. Great ocean. There's pictures in the computer of Brian hanging from a halyard. 1,000 miles from land. He's out at the end of the boom, hanging from a harness, doing something on the sail. Just stay on the bay. Little boats in big water. But anyway, there are other people on here. One of the things that over time, after that got in the water, I was able to figure out the boat, get it going a little faster, win a few races here and there, and then what happens is you start attracting people to the boat. It's like this boat's actually starting to do well. And what happens is very good sailors then decide they want to be on your boat. And we have David Bocci here tonight and his son. He sailed with us for a long time, a couple of years, and won a lot of races. Thank you, David. And there's a picture of us doing real well in a race in moderate light air, and his son at the time was, I don't know, 5, 6 years old. He's on the stern with a little string and a little boat. He's towing it. We're racing like crazy, and he's in the back just... Don't tell a PHRF committee. So, but it's been a lot of fun. And heck, if I can win the bullship race every decade, 2002, now 13, the course record for wins in bullship race is 7. I only have to win 5 more, so I got 5 more decades to live. Thank you. You are aware that life is not a spectator sport.